There's a quiet that settles into a house when you're the only one left to make a sound. It's a heavy silence, thick with the ghosts of laughter and conversations that ended years ago. For me, that silence became my most constant companion after my Arthur passed. Our little home in Willows Creek, Ohio, the one we'd built not just with wood and nails, but with 50 years of shared dreams, suddenly felt cavernous. The floorboards that once groaned under the weight of a bustling family now seemed to sigh with loneliness. It was in this quiet, this profound stillness of my later years, that the universe decided to play its most bewildering joke. I held a small slip of paper in my trembling hand, a lottery ticket worth $460 million. And in that moment, the silence in my house became the loudest, most terrifying sound I had ever heard. My name is Alara, and for 78 years, I had lived a life defined by simple truths. You work hard for what you have. You love your family with everything you've got. You pay your bills on time, you tend your garden, and you find joy in the little things: the first bloom of the peonies Arthur planted, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, a perfectly brewed cup of tea. Money was never the goal. It was a means to an end, a tool to keep the lights on and put food on the table. Arthur and I, we weren't poor, but we were deliberate. We saved, we planned, we made do. We raised 2 children, Robert and Susan, on the belief that character was worth more than any bank account. When Arthur was gone, that belief was all I had left to cling to. The world felt colder, sharper. My children, now grown with families and demanding careers of their own, lived in a different world than the one I knew. Robert was a financial advisor in Chicago, always talking in figures and percentages that made my head spin. Susan was a marketing executive in California, her life a whirlwind of conference calls and deadlines. They loved me, I knew they did, in their own way. But their love was often expressed in scheduled phone calls that felt more like checking a box on a to-do list. Hi, Mom. Just calling to check in. Everything okay? Good. Gotta run. Big meeting. The calls were brief, efficient, and left me feeling more alone than before I answered the phone. The lottery ticket was an accident, a whim. I'd gone to the corner store for a carton of milk, and the young man behind the counter, a sweet boy named Tim, said, "Big jackpot tonight, Mrs. Gable." Feeling lucky. I chuckled, and, for reasons I still can't explain, I bought a single ticket. I tucked it into the pocket of my coat and forgot all about it. A week later, I was cleaning out that same coat to donate it, and the little paper fell onto the floor. Curiosity, nothing more, led me to check the numbers online. The first number matched, then the second, then the third. My heart began to thrum against my ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings. Fourth, fifth. My breath hitched. I looked at the final number, the Powerball. It matched too. I stared at the screen, then at the ticket, then back at the screen. It wasn't possible. These things happened to other people, people on the news who jumped up and down and screamed and sprayed champagne. They didn't happen to an old widow in a quiet house in Willows Creek. I felt a wave of dizziness, a profound sense of dislocation, as if the floor beneath my feet had turned to water. $460 million. The number was so vast, so abstract, it had no meaning. It was like trying to imagine the distance to a star. My first thought was of Arthur. What would he say? I could almost hear his voice, calm and steady as it always was. Easy now, Ellie. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Arthur had a deep-seated distrust of easy money. He'd seen it ruin families, turning decent people into grasping, selfish strangers. Money doesn't change you, he used to say. It just makes you more of what you already are. And that thought, that simple, profound truth from my late husband, sent a chill down my spine. Who had my children become? Who had I become? The loneliness of the past few years had worn me down, made me feel invisible. I was Mom, a figure from their past, a voice on the phone they had to call out of duty. Did they see me? The woman who taught them to ride a bike, who stayed up all night when they were sick, who packed their lunches with little notes of encouragement. Or did they just see an old woman, a potential responsibility, a future burden? A dark, painful idea began to form in my mind. It was born of fear and a desperate, aching need to know the truth. This colossal sum of money, This supposed blessing could be the very thing that destroyed what little connection I had left with my own children. Or it could be a lens, a magnifying glass to see into their hearts. I looked around my quiet, empty house. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt strategic. It was a blank canvas. I made a decision that night, a vow whispered into the stillness of my living room. I would tell no one, not a soul. I would go through the process of claiming the money through a lawyer and a blind trust, a fortress of anonymity. And then I would do something that felt both cruel and necessary. I would become poor, not just in spirit, but in appearance. I would let my simple life fray at the edges, let the carefully stitched fabric of my existence begin to unravel. I would present my children with a test. Not a test of their wallets, but of their hearts. I needed to know, before I left this world, if I was leaving behind a legacy of love or simply an inheritance to be fought over. I needed to know if anyone would bother to catch me if I pretended to fall. The first part of my plan was the easiest. Claiming the prize was a blur of legal documents, hushed meetings in sterile offices, and the creation of an entity so anonymous it felt like I was reading about someone else. The money, a staggering sum even after taxes, was deposited into accounts that I couldn't even properly comprehend. To the world and to my family, nothing had changed. I was still Alara Gable, a widow living on a modest pension and her social security in a small Ohio town. The secret was a stone in my gut, heavy and cold. Every time the phone rang, I flinched, expecting a call from a long-lost cousin or a charity that had somehow discovered my name. But the calls never came. My anonymity held. Now came the harder part. The slow, deliberate performance of decline. It began subtly. During my next scheduled call with Susan, I let a little weariness creep into my voice. "Oh, this old house," I sighed. "It seems like the moment you fix one thing, another thing breaks. The gutter is leaking again, right over the porch." "Oh, that's a shame, Mom." Susan's voice was distant, distracted. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background. "You should get someone to look at that. Have you tried one of those gutter guards?" I saw an ad for them. "Well, they can be a bit pricey, dear," I said, planting the first seed. "Right. Well, look into it. Anyway, I've got to jump on a call. Talk to you next week. Love you." And she was gone. The line went dead, and the silence that rushed and felt heavier than before. There was no offer to help. No, "Let me send you some money for the repair, Mom." Just a suggestion to buy a product she saw in an ad. I sat by the phone, my hand still resting on the receiver, and felt the first true pang of my experiment. It was working, and it was breaking my heart. A few weeks later, I tried with Robert. "The car's been making a funny noise," I told him, a complete fabrication. My 10-year-old sedan ran perfectly. "I'm a little worried to drive it too far." The mechanic said it might be the transmission and that it would cost a fortune to fix. "A fortune?" Robert repeated, and for a second, I thought I detected a flicker of concern. But it was the concern of a financial advisor, not a son. "Mom, maybe it's time to think about not driving anymore. You know, at your age. There are services, Uber, the town shuttle for seniors. It might be safer and more cost-effective in the long run than pouring money into an old car." He was managing a problem, not caring for his mother. He didn't ask if I needed help getting groceries or if I felt trapped in my own home without a car. He saw a line item on a balance sheet that was performing poorly, and his solution was to eliminate it. "I'll think about it, dear," I said, my voice small. I felt a piece of myself shrink with those words. I was becoming the person he saw, a liability. These conversations became the new, painful rhythm of my life. I'd mention a drafty window, a rising electricity bill, a prescription that had gone up in price. Their responses were always the same, practical, impersonal advice. "You should wear a sweater, Mom. Have you looked into budget billing? Are you sure you need the name brand?" They were a million miles away, not just geographically, but emotionally. They were solving small problems with small words, never once seeing the larger picture of the lonely woman who was speaking them. They never saw my fear. They never saw my need for simple, human connection. But then there was Leo, my grandson, Susan's boy. He was 19, a freshman at the state university, just a couple of hours away. He was a gentle soul, more like Arthur than anyone else in the family. He had my late husband's thoughtful eyes and his quiet way of observing the world before speaking. He called me every Sunday, not because his mother told him to, but because he wanted to. Our conversations weren't rushed. He'd tell me about his classes, a funny professor, the terrible food in the cafeteria. He'd ask about my garden and whether the finches had returned to the feeder. During one of our calls, after a particularly disheartening conversation with Robert, I let my guard down more than I intended. He asked how I was, and instead of my usual "I'm fine, dear," I said, "Oh, Leo, I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed today." He paused. The line was silent, but it wasn't the empty silence of his mother's distractedness. It was an attentive silence. "Overwhelmed how, Grandma? Is everything all right?" Tears pricked my eyes. It was the first time anyone had asked a follow-up question. "It's just this old house," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It feels like it's falling down around me. The porch step is rotted through. I almost fell this morning. The garden is a jungle of weeds. It's all just too much for one person." "Grandma," he said, and his voice was so full of genuine concern it was like a bomb on a burn. "I have a long weekend coming up. Let me come down. I can fix that step. I can help you in the garden. We can tackle it together." "Oh no, dear, you have your studies. You shouldn't have to worry about your old grandmother's falling apart house." "It's not a worry," he said firmly. "It's what family does. I want to come. I'll be there Friday afternoon." And he was. That Friday, his beat-up old car pulled into my driveway, and my heart swelled with a feeling I hadn't felt in years: hope. He bounded out of the car, gave me a hug that didn't feel rushed, and immediately set to work. He spent hours replacing the rotted porch step, his brow furrowed in concentration. He refused my offers of money for the wood, saying he'd saved up from his campus job. The next day, he was in the garden, pulling weeds with a determination that reminded me so much of Arthur. We worked side by side, our hands in the dirt, talking for hours. In the evening, as we sat in the kitchen drinking lemonade, he looked at me with those serious, kind eyes. "Grandma, are you okay? Financially, I mean. Mom and Uncle Robert, they have a lot, you know. If you need anything, you should just ask them." The life felt like acid on my tongue. "They're very busy, Leo. I don't want to be a bother." He shook his head, a look of frustration on his young face. "You're not a bother. You're their mother." He hesitated, then reached into his wallet and pulled out a crumpled wad of bills. It couldn't have been more than $60 or $70. "Here," he said, pushing it across the table toward me. "It's not much, but maybe it'll help with the groceries this week. I got paid yesterday." I stared at the money. His hard-earned, part-time job money. He had so little, and he was offering it all. My children had so much, and they offered only empty words. The dam inside me broke. I began to cry. Not loud, wailing sobs, but the silent, shoulder-shaking tears of a woman who was simultaneously heartbroken and profoundly grateful. Leo was confused, rushing to my side, patting my shoulder. "Grandma, what's wrong? Did I say something wrong?" I shook my head, unable to speak. I was crying for the loss of the children I thought I knew. I was crying from the guilt of deceiving this beautiful, kind-hearted boy. And I was crying with the fierce, burning relief of knowing that I wasn't entirely alone. The truth was solidifying in front of me, clearer and more painful than I could have imagined. Arthur was right. Money didn't change you. It just showed you who you truly were. And my grandson, with his empty pockets and his full heart, was the richest person I knew. My test was far from over, but in that moment, I knew I had already found my heir. Not the heir to my fortune, but the heir to my heart. The weeks following Leo's visit were a strange mix of deep comfort and escalating sorrow. His act of pure, unhesitating generosity had fortified my resolve. My secret test was no longer just a morbid curiosity, it was a mission. I had to see it through, not for my sake anymore, but for his. I had to protect the future I could now imagine for him, a future built on a foundation of character, not entitlement. I needed to know, with absolute certainty, the landscape of my own family's hearts before I could decide how to dispense a fortune that could either build or bulldoze lives. I decided to escalate the illusion. The small complaints about household repairs were not enough. I had to create a crisis, a situation that couldn't be solved with a dismissive piece of advice. It felt like a betrayal of the simple, honest life Arthur and I had built, but I steeled myself with the memory of Leo's crumpled dollar bills on my kitchen table. My next call to Susan was carefully orchestrated. I waited until I knew she would be in the middle of her workday. I let my voice shake, infusing it with a panic I didn't have to work very hard to feign. Susan, I don't know what to do. I got a letter from the bank. What letter, Mom? Slow down, she said, the familiar sound of typing in the background. It's about the mortgage, I lied, my heart pounding with the deceit. Arthur and I had paid off the house 15 years ago. I must have missed a payment, or maybe a few. They're talking about foreclosure. I let the last word hang in the air, a poison dart. The typing stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Foreclosure? Mom, that's impossible. Dad paid that house off ages ago. I had to take out a small loan a few years back, I improvised, the lies coming more easily now, each one tasting like ash. For the new furnace. I thought I could handle the payments, but with the cost of everything else. I've fallen behind. They said I have 60 days. The silence stretched on. I could practically hear the calculations happening in her head. Not, how can I help my mother, but what does this problem mean for me? Finally, she spoke, her voice tight and clinical. Okay, don't panic. You need to send me a copy of that letter. I'll have my assistant look at it. There must be some kind of program, a deferment or something. We need to be strategic about this. Strategic, not compassionate. Not, I'm so sorry, Mom. Don't worry, we'll figure this out. It was a business problem. A messy, inconvenient business problem that had landed on her desk. She didn't offer to cover the fictional missed payments. She offered to delegate the task of looking into it. The conversation ended with her promising to get back to me after she'd assessed the situation. I hung up the phone and felt a profound emptiness. I repeated the performance for Robert, tailoring the story to his financial mindset. I'm in a bit of a bind, Robert, I said, my voice heavy. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. His reaction was immediate and, in its own way, even more chilling than Susan's. Foreclose? On what grounds? What's the outstanding principal? What's the interest rate? Did you get into one of those reverse mortgages? Mom, I told you to talk to me before signing any financial documents. The accusations came first. The blame. It was my fault for being financially inept. It was just a small home equity loan, I whispered, feeling the role of the helpless old woman envelop me. I needed a new roof. A new roof, he sighed, a long, exasperated sound. Okay, look. The housing market in Willows Creek is flat. The equity in that house is probably not what you think it is. Honestly, at this point, selling might be the most logical option. Downsize. Move into a senior apartment. It would be far more manageable for you, and it would liquidate the asset before the bank can take it. Liquidate the asset. He was talking about my home. The home where I had raised him. The home where his height was still marked in pencil on a doorframe. He was talking about it as if it were a poorly performing stock. The conversation ended with him promising to run some numbers and come up with a fiscally responsible exit strategy. An exit strategy from my own life. I didn't have to call Leo. He called me that Sunday, as always. He could tell something was wrong in the first 10 seconds. Grandma, you sound terrible. What's happened? The lie felt heaviest with him. I repeated the story about the foreclosure, my voice cracking with genuine shame. I hated deceiving him. But his reaction was the final piece of the puzzle, the last bit of evidence I needed. He didn't offer advice. He didn't blame me. He didn't talk about exit strategies. There was just a sharp intake of breath, followed by a fierce, protective declaration. No, they are not taking your house. I'll be there tomorrow. Leo, no, you have classes. I'll talk to my professors. This is more important. I'm coming home. He arrived the next day, his young face etched with worry. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd offered me his grocery money. Okay, he said, taking my hands in his. How much is it? How much do you owe? Don't be embarrassed. Just tell me the number. Leo, it's thousands of dollars. It's not something you can fix. I can try, he insisted. I can take a semester off school. I can get a full-time job at the factory on the edge of town. I have some student loan money I haven't touched yet for next semester's books. We can use that. We can sell my car. It's not worth much, but it's something. We will not let them take Arthur's house from you. He was offering to sacrifice his future for mine. He was willing to derail his education, sell his only transportation, and take on manual labor to save my home. All based on a lie I had told him. The weight of it all, the immense, beautiful, tragic weight of his love, was too much to bear. I looked at this boy, this young man with more integrity in his little finger than my two successful children had in their entire bodies, and I knew the test was over. The results were written in the indelible ink of character. To continue the charade any longer would be an act of unforgivable cruelty to the one person who had proven he deserved only the truth. I pulled my hands away and stood up, walking over to the old oak sideboard that held my important papers. My hands trembled as I unlocked a small drawer. I took out a thick file folder prepared by my lawyers. I walked back to the table and sat down, placing it in front of my bewildered grandson. "Leo," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time in months. "I have something to tell you, and it's going to be very hard to believe. The house isn't in foreclosure. I'm not broke. In fact, it's quite the opposite." I opened the folder. Inside were the trust documents, the bank statements, the confirmation of the lottery winnings. His eyes scanned the first page, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked from the paper to my face, then back to the paper. His eyes widened, his mouth falling slightly open as he saw the number. The number with all the zeros. "Grandma, what is this? Is this a joke? $460 million. This can't be real." "It's real, Leo," I said softly. "I won the lottery a few months ago, and I haven't told anyone but my lawyer. And now you." The confusion on his face slowly melted away, replaced by a cascade of other emotions. Shock, disbelief, and then a flicker of something else. Hurt. Then, all of it? The leaky roof, the car, the foreclosure? You were pretending. Tears streamed down my face now, hot tears of confession. "Yes," I whispered. "And I am so sorry that I had to lie to you. But I needed to know. I needed to see. I was so scared, Leo. Scared of what this money would do to our family. I had to know who truly cared about me and not about this." I gestured to the folder. He stared at me, his young face a mask of conflicting emotions. He was processing the deception, the sheer scale of the secret, and the reasons behind it. He looked at the folder, then at my tear-streaked face. He was silent for a full minute, and in that silence, my entire world hung in the balance. I had tested my family and found only one true heart. And now I risked losing it through my own deceit. Leo sat in stunned silence, his gaze shifting between the documents on the table and my face. The air in my kitchen, usually filled with the comforting scent of tea and old wood, was thick with the magnitude of my confession. I had just dismantled his reality, not only revealing an incomprehensible fortune, but also admitting that his recent fears and sacrifices had been born from my elaborate and painful deception. I held my breath, bracing for his anger, for his disappointment. I had manipulated him, even if my motives were to find someone worthy of trust, and I had no right to expect his understanding. Finally, he closed his eyes and took a long, slow breath. When he opened them again, the hurt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a deep, soul-shaking sadness. "You were that lonely," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A realization that pierced me to the core. You felt so alone that you had to create a disaster just to see if anyone would show up. My own sob was my only answer. He had seen straight through the mechanics of my test and into the desolate heart of it. He understood. He pushed the folder of financial documents aside, as if it were an irrelevant distraction. He reached across the table and took my hands again, his grip firm and steady. "I'm not mad that you lied, Grandma," he said, his voice soft but sure. "I'm just so sorry you felt you had to." In that moment of pure, unadulterated empathy, my love for him became something fierce and absolute. He was a gift. He was Arthur's legacy in human form. We sat there for a long time, and I told him everything. I told him about my fear on the night I won, the echo of Arthur's warnings in my mind. I recounted, word for word, the dismissive conversations with Robert and Susan. I explained the soul-crushing experience of being treated like an item on a balance sheet, a problem to be managed. As I spoke, I felt the weight of the secret, a burden I had carried alone for months, begin to lift. I wasn't just confessing. I was transferring my trust to the one person who had earned it. "What do we do now?" he asked, his eyes scanning the documents again, this time with a sense of awe and responsibility. "First," I said, a new strength in my voice, "I am calling a family meeting. I will not do it over the phone. I want them here in this town. And I want you by my side." The next day, I made 2 phone calls. My tone was different. It was no longer the wavering voice of a woman in need. It was firm, resolute. I told Robert and Susan that I needed them to come to Willows Creek for an urgent family matter concerning the house. I gave them no other details. Their reactions were predictable. Susan complained about a major marketing launch. Robert grumbled about his client meetings. But my tone left no room for negotiation. I told them to be at the office of a local attorney, Mr. Davies, at 2 p.m. on Saturday. The use of a lawyer was a strategic move, suggested by my own legal team, to signal the gravity of the situation. That Saturday, I walked into Mr. Davies' conference room with Leo at my side. He had insisted on wearing a jacket and tie, looking so much older than his 19 years. I, on the other hand, wore my simple Sunday dress. I was no longer playing a part. I was just a Laura Gable. Robert and Susan were already there, looking impatient and irritated. "Mom, what is this all about?" Robert began, tapping his expensive watch. "I had to reschedule 3 appointments for this. And why are we at a lawyer's office? Are you being sued? Is this about the foreclosure?" Susan asked, her eyes darting around the room suspiciously. "Did you sign something you shouldn't have?" "I told you to send me the paperwork." I sat down at the head of the table. Leo took the seat to my right. I let them finish their flurry of anxious, self-involved questions. Then, in the silence that followed, I began to speak. "There is no foreclosure," I said calmly. "The house was paid off long ago. There is no debt. There was no leaky roof I couldn't afford to fix, no transmission I couldn't repair." They stared at me, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" Robert demanded. "Then why did you tell us all that? Why did you have us come all the way out here?" "I brought you here," I said, my gaze moving from his face to his sister's, "to tell you that I've come into a significant amount of money. A few months ago, I won the lottery." The air left the room. Susan's perfectly made-up face went slack with shock. Robert's jaw literally dropped. He looked like a fish gasping for air. "You? What?" Susan stammered. "How much?" "That is not the first question I had hoped you would ask," I said, and the sadness in my voice was deep and real. "But the amount is $460 million. A strangled sound came from Robert's throat. Susan's eyes, wide and unblinking, filled with a frantic, calculating light. The transformation was instantaneous and grotesque. The irritation and annoyance they had worn just moments before were replaced by a greedy, sycophantic wonder. "Mom, my God, that's incredible," Robert exclaimed, his voice suddenly slick and cheerful. "Why didn't you say anything?" "That is an excellent question, Robert," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "I didn't say anything because I was afraid. Your father always said that money doesn't change you. It just makes you more of what you already are. And I realized I didn't know who my children were anymore. So I conducted an experiment. I recounted everything. I reminded them of their exact words. Susan, when I told you my roof was leaking, you told me to look up a product you saw in an ad. When I told you the bank was going to take my home, you offered to have your assistant assess the situation." Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. "Robert, when I told you my car was broken, you told me I was too old to drive. When I told you I was losing the house your father and I built, you advised me to liquidate the asset and developed an exit strategy." He shrank in his chair, avoiding my gaze, staring at the polished mahogany of the table. "I presented you both with the image of your mother in need, frightened and alone. And you offered me advice. You offered me delegation. You treated me like an inconvenience, a problem to be managed from a distance. You were too busy, too important, to offer a single moment of genuine help or comfort. I paused, then turned and placed my hand on Leo's arm. And then there was Leo. When he heard I was overwhelmed, he drove 2 hours to fix my porch and weed my garden. When he thought I was broke, he offered me the last $70 from his wallet. And when he thought I was going to lose my home, he was ready to quit school, sell his car, and get a job at a factory to save it. He didn't offer advice. He offered himself. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Susan's quiet, shamed weeping. Robert stared at his hands, his face a mask of humiliation. So, yes, there is a fortune, I continued, my voice softening again. But you will not be inheriting it in the way you might imagine. I have established a trust. You will both receive a modest yearly allowance, enough to ensure you are comfortable, but not enough to change your lives. You will not be making decisions about this money, because you have shown me that your decision-making is flawed. I looked at Leo, whose face was a mixture of pride and sorrow for his mother and uncle. The bulk of the estate will be placed into a charitable foundation in your grandfather's name, the Arthur Gable Foundation for Community and Character. It will fund scholarships, support local businesses in Willows Creek, and help seniors in need. And the person who will help me run it, the person who will one day take it over, is Leo. Because he has proven that he understands the value of a dollar, but more importantly, he understands the value of a human heart. I stood up, my statement complete. The test was over. The truth was out. The family I had was not the family I thought, but the family I was left with was real and true. The journey had been excruciating, a path paved with lies and heartbreak. But it had led me here, to this moment of clarity. It had led me to a new purpose. The money was no longer a secret burden. It was a tool, a way to build a legacy of kindness in Arthur's name, with his true heir by my side. I walked out of that lawyer's office, leaving my children to sit with the consequences of their own hearts, and stepped into the sunshine, feeling, for the first time in a very long time, not alone at all. My house would no longer be silent. It would be filled with plans, with purpose, with the quiet, steady presence of love. And that was a treasure worth more than any lottery. You can walk away from a fire and watch the embers fade to gray, but you can't walk away from family with the same clean finality. The ties that bind us are not like rope that can be cut. They are more like roots, intertwined and stubborn, that continue to live and ache even when the tree above is broken. The drive home from the lawyer's office was the quietest I had ever shared with Leo. It wasn't the empty quiet of loneliness, but the dense, humming silence of a world irrevocably changed. We had left Robert and Susan sitting in that polished conference room, two monuments to their own shattered expectations. I had spoken my truth, laid the landscape of my heart bare, and drawn a line in the sand. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the tide of their want and regret would soon come rushing back to try and wash that line away. The first wave hit that very evening. The phone rang, and I saw Susan's name on the caller ID. Leo, who was quietly reading a book in Arthur's old armchair, looked up at me, his expression a mixture of apprehension and support. I took a breath and answered. Her voice was unrecognizable. The crisp, efficient tone of the marketing executive was gone, replaced by a thick, tearful pleading. Mom? Oh, Mom, I am so sorry, she began, the words tumbling out in a rush. I can't stop thinking about what you said. How you must have felt. I've been a terrible daughter. Just awful. I got so caught up in my own life, in my career. I lost sight of what's important. I failed you. I failed Dad's memory. The performance was flawless. Every word was perfectly chosen, every sob timed for maximum effect. But I had spent the last few months becoming a connoisseur of artifice, and my own deception had sharpened my senses to the deceptions of others. I listened, and I heard not the ring of truth, but the clatter of a hastily constructed defense. She wasn't sorry for how she had made me feel. She was horrified at how she now appeared in my eyes, the eyes of the woman who held the keys to a kingdom. Thank you for calling, Susan, I said, my voice gentle but distant. I appreciate you saying that. Can I come see you? Tomorrow, she pressed. Just me. I want to talk. I want to start making it right. Please, Mom. I looked over at Leo. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He saw it too. But I knew I had to let this play out. All right, Susan, I agreed. Tomorrow afternoon. Robert's attempt came via email the next morning. It was long, structured like a business proposal, with bullet points. It was an apology of a sort. He wrote of the suboptimal way he had interfaced with me and how his risk management mindset had overridden his familial protocols. He talked about shame and regret, but the language was so sterile, so devoid of genuine human emotion, it felt like it had been drafted by a committee of lawyers. The final paragraph was the tell. He offered his services, pro bono, of course, to help structure the governance of the new foundation, ensuring its long-term fiscal health and maximizing its philanthropic impact. He wasn't apologizing for his lack of heart. He was applying for a job. I printed the email and left it on the kitchen table without comment. When Leo came downstairs for breakfast, I saw him read it. He looked at me, his young face old with a weary disappointment that mirrored my own. He's unbelievable, he said softly. Susan arrived that afternoon bearing an orchid that was so large and ornate it looked alien in my simple living room. She hugged me, a desperate, clinging embrace that felt more like an act of possession than affection. We sat and she talked. She talked for 2 hours about her stress, her demanding boss, the pressure of her life. It was a long, winding narrative designed to excuse her neglect, to frame it not as a failure of character, but as a symptom of a high-achieving life. She was painting a portrait of herself as a victim of circumstance. I just want to be a part of your life again, Mom, she finished, her eyes glistening. And I want to help. With this foundation, it's such a beautiful idea. A tribute to Dad. I have so many ideas. We could host a gala, a fundraiser. I have contacts, celebrities who would come. We could make it the premier charitable event in the state. I listened to her vision, a glittering spectacle of glamour and press releases, and I thought of Arthur. Arthur, who hated wearing a tie. Arthur, whose idea of a good time was a quiet afternoon in his workshop, fixing a neighbor's broken chair for free. Arthur, who believed that charity was best done with your own 2 hands, not with champagne flutes and photographers. Susan, I said, my voice quiet but firm. The foundation won't be having galas. Her smile faltered. But why not? It would raise so much awareness. Your father's legacy isn't about awareness, I explained gently. It's about action. It's about helping the woman down the street who can't afford her medication. It's about funding the local library so children have a safe place to read. It's about giving a scholarship to a young person like Leo, who has a good heart and a strong back. It's about quiet, meaningful work, not loud, flashy events. The light in her eyes dimmed. I had rejected her vision, and in doing so, I had rejected her value. Her marketing prowess, the very core of her professional identity, was not needed here. She left soon after, the magnificent orchid standing awkwardly in the corner, a symbol of a love that was more about display than substance. In the days that followed, Leo and I began the real work. We turned my small sewing room into an office. We spent hours on the phone with my lawyers, learning the intricacies of creating a nonprofit. Leo, with his sharp, young mind, absorbed it all like a sponge. He took online courses in nonprofit management. He created spreadsheets. He drove me to meetings, sitting beside me, taking notes, asking intelligent questions that often left the lawyers impressed. I watched him, and my heart ached with pride. He was sacrificing his youth, the carefree days of a college sophomore, but he never once complained. He saw it as a duty, an honor. Our first project was small, but it felt monumental. The Willows Creek Community Center, a place where seniors gathered for potlucks and children had after-school programs, was on the verge of closing. Its roof leaked, its boiler was ancient, and its funding had been cut. Robert had once referred to it as a depreciating community asset. Leo and I went to meet the director, a tired but dedicated woman named Margaret. We walked through the building, saw the water stains on the ceiling tiles, the worn-out linoleum, the hopeful crayon drawings taped to the peeling walls. Margaret spoke of her fears of the seniors who would have nowhere to go, the children who would lose their safe haven. That afternoon, from our little office, Leo helped me draft the first official grant from the Arthur Gable Foundation. It was for the full amount needed to replace the roof, install a new, efficient heating system, and renovate the kitchen. When I called Margaret to tell her, she was silent for a moment, and then I heard her start to cry. They were not the calculated sobs of my daughter, but the overwhelmed, grateful tears of a person whose prayers had been answered. "You don't know what this means," she wept. "You've saved us." "It's what Arthur would have wanted," I told her, my own voice thick with emotion. The work was a balm to my soul. With every project we funded, with every life we touched, I felt the wounds from my children's betrayal begin to scar over. I was building something new, something that would outlast me, something that was a true reflection of the love Arthur and I had shared. The silence in my house was gone, replaced by the buzz of purpose. The phone rang not with dutiful check-ins, but with calls from people we were helping, their voices filled with hope. But my children were not finished. Having failed to ingratiate themselves through apology and offers of help, they changed tactics. The next phase was intervention. They decided, in their infinite wisdom, that I was being manipulated. They arrived together one Saturday morning unannounced. They walked into my home with grim, determined expressions. Leo and I were at the kitchen table, reviewing a proposal for a new literacy program at the elementary school. "Mom, we need to talk," Robert said, standing over the table like a prosecutor. Susan stood behind him, her arms crossed, a pained look on her face. "What is this, Robert?" I asked, putting my glasses down. "This is about him," Robert said, gesturing dismissively at Leo. "We're worried about you, Mom. You've handed over control of everything to a 19-year-old boy. He's making you cut us out. He's poisoning you against your own children." "He's a kid, Mom," Susan chimed in, her voice full of faux concern. "What does he know about money? About the world? He's probably overwhelmed, in way over his head. Or worse, he's taking advantage of you in your grief." I looked at Leo. His face was pale, his knuckles white where he gripped his pen. He was being accused of the very sins their own hearts harbored. He looked at me, ready to defend himself, but I put a hand on his arm, silently telling him to let me handle it. I rose from my chair, my 78-year-old frame feeling as solid as an ancient oak. I looked at my two children, my creations, my deepest joys, and my most profound disappointments. "Let me be perfectly clear," I said, and my voice did not tremble. "Leo has done nothing but show me the love and respect that I once thought was a parent's right to expect. He has sacrificed his time and his energy to help me build a legacy for the grandfather he adored. He has not taken advantage of me. He has anchored me." I took a step closer, and they both instinctively flinched. "You, on the other hand, see him not as my helper, but as your competition. You are not worried about me being manipulated. You are furious that you are not the ones doing the manipulating. You didn't care about my well-being when you thought I was a poor old woman in a crumbling house. You only started caring when you found out that old woman was one of the richest in the country. Your concern is a currency, and you spend it only where you expect a return." I pointed to the door. "Your presence here is not helpful. It is painful. You have shown me you are, not once, but repeatedly. I accept it. But I will not allow you to come into this house, your father's house, and poison the good work we are doing with your accusations and your greed. So please leave." They stood frozen for a moment, shocked by the finality in my voice. There were no more tears from Susan, no more business speak from Robert. There was only the ugly, unveiled truth of their own natures reflected in my eyes. Robert opened his mouth to argue, saw the look on my face, and closed it again. Without another word, they turned and walked out of my house. As the door clicked shut, the tension in the room broke. Leo let out a long, shuddering breath. I walked back to him and gently took his face in my hands. "Don't you ever let them make you doubt your own goodness," I told him fiercely. "You are the best of us, Leo. The very best." He leaned his forehead against mine, and for a moment, we just stood there, a two-person fortress against a world of disappointment. The roots of our family were indeed tangled and broken in places. But here, in this kitchen, a new root had taken hold, strong and deep. It was a partnership, a friendship, a bond forged not just by blood, but by a shared understanding of what truly mattered. The fortune hadn't given me back the family I thought I had, but it had revealed the one I truly needed. And together, we had work to do. The silence that fell after the door closed on Robert and Susan was different from any I had known before. It wasn't the heavy, lonely silence of a widow in an empty house, nor was it the strategic, waiting silence of my secret experiment. This was the clean, quiet ache of an amputation. A painful, necessary removal had taken place, and in the space my children had once occupied, there was now a strange and hollow peace. Leo stood motionless by the kitchen table, his shoulders slumped, the weight of the confrontation settling upon him. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with the shock of what had just transpired. "I can't believe they said that to you," he whispered, his voice full of a pain that was not his own, but which he carried for me. "That they think that of me." I walked over to him and put my arms around his shoulders, pulling him into a hug. He was so tall now, no longer the boy who had offered me his crumpled bills, but a young man forged in a fire he never should have had to face. "They don't think that of you, Leo," I said, my cheek resting against his hair. "They are simply incapable of understanding you. It's like trying to explain the color blue to a person born blind. They don't have the faculty to see goodness, so they assume it must be a trick." We stood there for a long time, drawing strength from each other. In that moment, I made another vow, a silent promise to him and to myself. I would not let their bitterness be the final chapter of the story. Their exit was not an ending. It was a clearing of the ground so that something new and strong could grow. And so we began to build. The work became our sanctuary. The Arthur Gable Foundation was no longer just an idea or a legal entity. It was a living, breathing thing that we nurtured every day. Our little office, once my sewing room, was now the heart of Willows Creek's quiet revival. We didn't fund galas, we funded lives. I remember a young mother named Sarah who had come to the community center. She was fleeing a bad situation in a nearby city with her 2 small children, and she had nothing but a suitcase and a fierce determination to keep her kids safe. She needed a security deposit and the first month's rent on a small apartment, a sum that was an impossible mountain for her, but a gentle hill for the foundation. Leo and I met with her not in an office, but on a park bench while her children played on the swings. We didn't give her a check. Leo went with her to the landlord. He went with her to the furniture store and used foundation funds to buy 2 new beds, so her children would no longer have to sleep on the floor. I watched him from the car, saw him carry a mattress with the same determination he had used to pull weeds in my garden, and I knew this was the legacy. It wasn't the money. It was this act of showing up. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye, each day a brick laid in the foundation of our new reality. Leo, balancing his work with online university courses, graduated with honors. He was no longer a boy playing a part. He was a compassionate and savvy director, respected by the lawyers, the accountants, and most importantly, by the people we served. The lines of worry that had first appeared on his face during my deception had been replaced by the thoughtful lines of a man with purpose. My contact with Robert and Susan dwindled to the barest minimum. The yearly allowance I had arranged for them was, as my lawyer called it, a gilded cage. It was enough to prevent them from ever claiming they were destitute, but not enough to fund their lavish lifestyles without their own considerable efforts. Robert took it the hardest. I would occasionally receive angry letters from his attorneys, full of veiled threats and accusations of undue influence, which I would pass to my own legal team to be filed away. He saw the fortune as a prize that had been stolen from him, and he could not let it go. Susan, on the other hand, surprised me. After about a year, she quit her high-pressure marketing job. Her desperate, pleading calls stopped. Instead, on my birthday and at Christmas, a simple card would arrive. Not a fancy, expensive one, but the kind you buy in a pack of 10 at the grocery store. Inside, she would write only, "Thinking of you, Mom." There were no requests, no apologies, no justifications. Just those 4 words. I didn't know what to make of it. Perhaps the loss of the grand prize had forced her off the frantic treadmill of her life, leaving her with a quiet she didn't know how to fill. I held on to the sliver of hope that in that quiet, she might one day find some small piece of herself she had lost along the way. I had just turned 81 when my body, which had carried me through so much, finally sent an invoice for its long service. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, but a quiet betrayal from within. The doctor's words were kind but clear. My time, once stretching ahead like an open road, was now a short, winding path with a definite end in sight. My first thought was of Leo. I found him in my garden, which he now tended with the same care Arthur once had. He was staking the tomatoes, his back strong in the afternoon sun. I sat on the old stone bench, and he came and sat beside me, wiping the sweat from his brow. "The tomatoes are going to be good this year, Grandma," he said with a smile. "Leo," I began, my voice steady. I would not burden him with fear. I would grant him the dignity of the truth. I told him what the doctor had said. His smile faded, and a profound sadness filled his eyes, the same sadness I'd seen the day I confessed my secret to him. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just reached out and took my wrinkled, soil-stained hand in his strong, young one. "We'll face it," he said finally, his voice thick but resolute. "We'll face it together. Just like everything else." In the weeks that followed, we worked with a quiet urgency. We put the final pieces of the foundation's succession plan in place. We documented everything, ensuring the transition would be seamless. I was passing a torch, and I needed to be certain his hand was steady enough to hold it. It was more than steady, it was capable and sure. One evening, as we sat in the living room reviewing the plans for a new wing on the local library, I looked at him and saw not the boy I had tested, but the man he had become. "Your grandfather built this house with his hands," I told him, my voice soft. "He believed in things that were solid, real, and true. I want you to build this foundation with your heart, Leo. Never forget that we are not in the business of money. We are in the business of human dignity." That is his legacy. That is our legacy. He nodded, his eyes shining. "I won't forget, Grandma. I promise." A few days later, a small package arrived. It was from Susan. There was no card inside, only a single, faded photograph. It was of me and her, taken in the park a lifetime ago. I was pushing her on a swing, my head thrown back in laughter. She was a little girl with a gap-toothed grin, her face full of pure, unadulterated joy. Tucked behind the photo was a handwritten note on a small piece of paper. It said only, "I remember this day. I'm sorry." Tears welled in my eyes. It wasn't a plea for money. It wasn't an excuse. It was, perhaps, the first truly honest thing she had said to me in years. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't a reunion. But it was a crack of light in a dark room. It was enough. The quiet has returned to my house now. I spend most of my days in Arthur's armchair, looking out at the garden. The work of the foundation continues, safe in Leo's hands. He still lives here with me, his quiet, steady presence a constant comfort. He fills the bird feeder, reads to me in the evenings, and tells me about the lives we are changing, the small miracles we are making happen every day in this little Ohio town. The silence that once terrified me, the silence I once weaponized, has become a friend. It is no longer heavy with loneliness. It is full. It is filled with the echoes of good work, the warmth of a love that was tested and proven true, and the peaceful, certain knowledge that I am leaving this world better than I found it. The lottery ticket was a random act of cosmic chance, a chaotic explosion of numbers. But what it bought, in the end, was not chaos. It bought clarity. It bought purpose. It bought me the truth. And it showed me that my real fortune was never the money. It was the love of a boy who was willing to give up everything for me, and in doing so, became the heir to my entire world.